My name is Sawyer Magnus, and welcome to our session called Management What Management, Addressing Collections Management for Accessibility Needs. I said I'm Sawyer Magnus. I'm from Texas A&M University Commerce. With me also is Brittany Rodriguez from the University of Houston, Victoria, and Matthew Peak, the University of Houston, Clear Lake. And we'll be talking about all kinds of different things related to collections management and different planning processes and many other things that we've gone through at our own institutions. So without any further ado, I will start once I share my screen really quick here. There we go. Okay. Like I said, welcome everybody. My name is Sawyer Magnus, and my presentation is called The Great Archival Scavenger Hunt, Creating and Conducting a Collection Inventory in Small Shop Archives. And I will basically just be discussing the whole process we went through at my institution to try to get a better handle on what we actually had in our stacks in general, which is always a fun time. So just a little bit of background. The university I work at was originally founded in 1889 as East Texas Normal College. Went through quite a variety of different name changes over the years, and eventually they joined the Texas A&M system in 1996. The archives itself was founded in the early 1970s, initially as a university history and oral history sort of department of the library. Today, we still do collect a lot of oral histories, but we serve as the university history repository, as well as a repository for the Northeast Texas region, basically everywhere from east of the Metro Dallas area, all the way north of the Oklahoma border and over to the border with Arkansas, that kind of more rural sort of area. We have roughly 4,000 linear feet of records, about 10,000 books, a variety of other assorted maps, 3D objects, 2D objects, audiovisual materials, all sorts of different things. And how we got those numbers is kind of some of the result of this whole entire process I'm going to be talking about today. So the origins of our project, how we ended up deciding we needed to do a full inventory. First of all, we had a lot of staff turnover. We only really have 4 staff members in the department writ large, but 2 of us, including myself, started in late 2019. And as a result of that kind of process for the department, we lost a lot of institutional knowledge basically about what we had, where it was, how things were labeled, etc. We also had a deaccession situation where a previous donor who had left some items in the archives decided that he wanted the items back. And we found in the process we didn't actually have a deed of gift for those items, so we didn't really have formal possession of those. And so that led to a whole nother situation where we decided we want to do a survey of some of the paperwork that we have. And you can kind of see an example of the spreadsheet we put together as far as what we found, or to put it better, what we didn't find related to some collections that we already had in our archive space instance that we used to keep track of our materials. And it was a variety of paperwork we had that was signed, paperwork we didn't have, certain other permissions that were allowed and not allowed over time. We also wanted to get an idea, just a better idea for the 2 of us that started that were new, just a general familiarity with our collections, and what better way to do that than just do a full scale inventory to figure out what you have, as time consuming as that might be. There we go. So our initial planning, in November 2019, we started meeting together as a group to try to sort of figure out what this process might look like and determine what our goals would be. You can kind of see just a little example of what our more formalized goals document looked like that we put together. The main goals that we basically had were intellectual control, to better understand the content of the collections that we did have, as well as a better labeling scheme, because there were a variety of things that either were labeled poorly or weren't labeled at all in our collections. So finding out what was in any particular box was a little iffy for some things, as well as physical control. So knowing the location of everything that we had in our storage areas, because sometimes those weren't clearly marked or noted, as well as determining the condition of some items as well, especially things that were just mostly very vulnerable, very brittle, things like that. Try to prioritize projects for the future processing projects, what we think would be most attractive to get more people to use some of our resources. as well as general access, trying to promote the collections that we do already have and already had available, and gain professional knowledge of what we had. So when someone came to us with a research question, we'd be able to point them in the right direction without having to scramble for 20 minutes trying to figure out what might actually be helpful to them. We did do research some articles about the topic as well, preliminarily, and you can see some of them, a couple of those there that I included, that Taking Stock and Making Hay from Conway and Profit, as well as the Flug article, Assessing Archival Collections Through Surveys. Those are at least helpful in terms of giving us a little bit of a basic background of some things to think about, at least in the planning process whenever we went through the whole thing. So some things that we questioned in the process. What kind of thing are we actually trying to do? Are we trying to do a full collection assessment, condition of everything, what everything is? Are we trying to do just a more thorough audit of every individual thing, how things were processed, what was done well, not done well? Or are we doing just more of a basic inventory? Where are things at? Are they where they're supposed to be? How do we record data? Were we going to use a database? Were we going to use a spreadsheet? Were we going to keep paper records, or do a little bit of all three of those things somehow along the way? How are we going to label items, especially things that weren't identified previously that we need to create a label for? What do we do with unknown items? Do we try to match those with paperwork right away? Do we just take a note of what's in this particular box that we don't know what it is and then come back to it later? How do we manage things where we think certain things in certain boxes might be related, but we really don't know? And then to follow on that, when do we correct information? When do we decide that we want to say these boxes are very obviously one collection all put together? Let's make a new collection out of this, more formalized in a more formal way. And then just in general, where and when do we want to actually start this whole process? Because figuring out a good starting point was kind of one of those things we had to debate and go back and forth on. There we go. And then that's what this looked like whenever we tried to brainstorm. It was very nice that in one of our offices, we had a gigantic whiteboard to actually plan out a bunch of these things. It's a little small, of course, for people in person to read, but basically there's a variety of different things related to how do we identify things. Are we using a laptop? Are we keeping track of things on paper? How much time are we devoting to this? Are we working in partners or working solo? How many days should we devote to this each week, or how many hours? When do we rename things, and how do we rename things, and what type of codes do we need to use? And this was a full afternoon of we need to figure some of these things out. So our plan basically that we had decided initially is to work in pairs to help, especially for shelves where we had a lot of items we didn't recognize or didn't know. So identifying those things would go a little bit faster. We'd use an access database, and you can see an early version of that here roughly to enter our data into to keep track of it initially. Focus on finding items in the location. Where are they at? Are items there where they're supposed to be? Are they not? Or are there things there that we didn't know were there in the first place? And then label them so we can go back and find them later. We decided to test a couple of shelves to see how this process would work, and then plan the full scale thing to start when we came back from spring break in March of 2020. However, everything changed when COVID attacked. Of course, whenever we all got sent home for 4 months and we weren't in person in the summer. And then when we came back and everybody was trying to stay 6 feet away from each other as best as we could, the whole let's work in pairs idea didn't really work out so well at that point. And we had to change exactly how we were going to kind of go through things. So we decided to change it to an individual process, try to have each of us devote maybe 1 day a week to go back and go through a shelf and systematically, so that we know who's working on what area, so that we weren't overlapping in a weird sort of way. We tried to estimate how long it would take to finish each shelf that we had collection items on, and we based that on whether items were accessioned, were not accessioned, if they were fully processed or not, because if things were fully processed, we didn't have to spend as much time going through each box. If things were unidentified, we don't know what's in them, they were going to take a little bit longer. Or if there were a lot of 3D objects, also would have taken longer. So we tested that process, adjusted the database with a few more things, and then started really in January of 2021. So for the database, our process basically was to add all containers as an individual line item, and every object or other things in as an individual line item in the database. We report each container separately with what type of container it was, if it was a box, if it was an object, if it was an item in a map case, for example, and then a special number, and I'll get into that in a little bit. We would note next steps that we needed to take. Do things need to be rehoused? Do they need to be labeled differently with a new labeling system? Were there condition problems we needed to think about? Things that were missing in the wrong locations that need to be updated, things like that, as well as more open field notes that's to the description of a collection if we didn't know really what it was or wasn't identified previously, to say what kind of materials were in it. Condition issues, any other unknown mysteries or other related collections, things that we might have found that we say, I think it's related to this other collection we already identified, but we're not sure yet. We wrote down the extent of everything in linear feet or in number of items or number of folders if it was something that didn't really fit into that linear feet kind of mold directly, as well as the date and the name of the person conducting the inventory when they saw this object last and who saw it. That way we had a record of when it was last seen and actually noticed on the shelves. In terms of the physical side of things, we decided not to open boxes unless it was necessary. If it was something that wasn't identified, we didn't know what it was, then we would open the box and very briefly look and see what was inside it, not looking necessarily in every folder or everything like that, just to get a holistic idea of what was there. We wanted to limit rehousing or relocating items initially because the main goal was really to focus on knowing what we had and where it was now, as opposed to saying this is where it should have been, because that could have required a lot more moving things around than would have been necessary. And moving boxes around for multiple days is not that much fun. We also created temporary labels, and you can see a couple of examples on the screen here. They're really light. You might not see them very well. But basically, for each of them, we included a temporary accession number, a title of the box or the collection, and then a container number. The title and container number are relatively self-explanatory, but the temporary accession number, what we did, because we didn't want to just start putting things into archive space and formally accessioning things right away when we might have end up with 5 accessions that are all related and should be one collection. So what we did is we came up with a coding system. We used the letter U for unidentified, and then another letter based on what it was. If it was a box, UB. If it was a collection, UC. If it was a 3D object, U3D. And then just a 4-digit number after that, depending on when it was found. So 0001 was the first one, and working its way up to whatever based on that coding system. And then we also made our own tags from folder stock, basically to tag 3D objects, 3D items. We decided we didn't want to actually write on the items or on the base of items or things like that. So we used a tag and string to tag everything. Okay, there we go. So some obstacles we faced were staffing changes. One of the other archivists that started in 2019 left for a different position. There were also some other medical issues that people were dealing with over time. So we weren't really able to push forward as quickly as we would have wanted to as a result of that, as well as other daily activities. So research questions, other accessions, other processing work. We had to be able to balance this project with a bunch of other things because we were a small shop. We really only had 3 to 4 people working on anything at any particular time. And sometimes there's a research question where it's an all hands on deck situation. And so everybody had to kind of drop what they were doing and help to try to contribute to this, as well as other unexpected responsibilities, committee work on campus. I had to teach an archives class for 1 semester, and that took a lot of time and effort to prepare for all of that. And so there were a lot of other things we kind of had to deal with and work through that regard. So our initial results, we actually just finished the first phase of finding everything about a month ago, a little over a month ago, because of all those other things I mentioned earlier that took a lot more time to kind of work through. Other phases, things we're going to move on to now that we have all of this in one place. Try to unite some paperwork that don't necessarily have a collection related to them and orphan collections that don't have paperwork, and figure out what matches and what else might be missing. Updating our locations and archive space, because that's what we used for our collections management system, and making sure things in there are in the right place as far as we know it now. Decide what items we want to accession, or maybe what items don't really fit our collecting scope and our mission anymore and might be better served at a different institution or somewhere else, as well as space reorganization to try to get a better idea of using our shelf space in a more productive way, rather than having one large painting taking up a shelf that could store a lot of other things, for example. And so just some lessons learned at the very end here. One, expect the unexpected in terms of staffing changes, in terms of not being able to do things the way you exactly expected to, because the best laid plans go awry sometimes, whether you predict a pandemic is going to happen or not. These things happen. Balancing your project with daily duties, especially if you're in a smaller workforce or a smaller archives, being able to balance working on a larger project like this with your daily tasks, with reference requests, with other things that people may ask you about, or other collections that people might want to donate to you in the process too. Setting checkpoints along the way, so you're able to reflect and say, this took a little bit longer than I wanted. Maybe we need to adjust our timetable a little bit, or this went a lot faster than we thought, and maybe we can speed things up a little bit more. And then starting things with small changes too, once this is done, not necessarily trying to change everything all at once, because that could lead to things getting lost as well in the stacks. And that's also not really helpful in the grand scheme of things sometimes. And that's my contact information. I'll also take some questions from the audience in person as well as virtually at the end. But that is all I have.
Bear with me while I'm getting the screen sharing set up. All right. Very similar situations occurred at my department as well, in the Victoria Regional History Center at the University of Houston, Victoria, similar to the A&M Commerce archives. My name is Brittany Rodriguez, and I'm the archivist and special collections librarian. I also oversee and manage the Victoria Regional History Center. A little bit of background, our collection was actually started by two history faculty members in the late 1970s. After they had started growing the local history collection, as well as the Victoria College collection for its historical archives. They ended up having two different long-term librarians overseeing the department, which was managed between the late 1980s up until 2015, when the last librarian retired. Because of this, there had not been an archivist in charge of the collection before. And obviously faculty members with a history background are going to focus on different importances than say a librarian would, than say an archivist would. So we found a couple different gaps in the collection that we needed to correct in order to prepare for moving off-site for storage. However, then UHV went under a hiring freeze in 2016. So there was no librarian or anyone overseeing the department for 2 years. They finally got special permission for a 1-year temporary contract job. Because they knew that they needed help getting this collection ready in order to move. So that is where I got hired in. An overview of the collections. We do a lot of different things at the Regional History Center. We are the institutional repository for the Victoria College, as well as the University of Houston, Victoria. Our campuses kind of just stretch alongside each other. We are a regional historical resource depository for the state of Texas. There are 23 around the state. So we have 7 counties of historical records that are non-current, between in paper and on microfilm. We have identified, since I was hired, over 200 local history manuscript collections. We've got a photograph collection of over 33,000 photographs. We are now the newspaper archives for the Victoria Advocate, which was founded in 1846. It is one of the oldest still running newspapers in the state of Texas, and we became their official archives with their photo archives and their bound issues and microfilm during COVID. We also have an extensive map collection, extensive in our small shop considerations, as well as architectural collections. But total, we've got about 3,500 linear feet of materials that are now identified and sitting in our stacks over in offsite storage. The original setup, like I said, I've mentioned Victoria College and University of Houston, Victoria, and that is because we were a joint library between the college and university for 46 years. We did split in 2019. However, my department was the one joint department that continued to be joint. It is the archives and special collections. They were stored in 3 different levels of the previous building, which is the picture shown on the screen. So we had storage rooms of items up in the 3rd floor. Our department was on the 2nd floor. We had storage rooms in the basement level. And the only identifying information that we had was the box number that was tied to a specific location. And there's some examples on the screen about that, how that setup looked. They used the abbreviation of the room. So HC stood for the History Center. And then it had numbers after that told you which like row and shelf and spot to go to. And then same for all the different areas. I think at one time we had 7 different rooms being used for storage throughout the library building. And then if something changed and they needed that room for something else, then they had moved whatever materials were inside somewhere else. And as you can imagine, not everything got updated in the database. We also were using a basic rudimentary type of database for this information. They were actually on MySQL database tables and put into a hand-coded database that was searchable online. We lost our web services librarian, who was the only one that coded. So as things have changed and there's been different staff turnover outside of our department, we've lost the ability to go back and change some information. So in preparing for the first move, the full move to storage happened in 2 separate stages. The first move was going to take place in May of 2019. So I had 1 year to get this done. I had to identify the collections because we did not have any idea what all we held. I had to find any associating paperwork. Many collections, we do not have a deed of gift, which makes it very stressful when you do get donors coming back 20, 25 years later saying, well, I know you have this, I gave it to you. So in this consideration, I created a collection register, kind of a master list, starting with manuscript number 1. And I assigned each collection that I came across and found paperwork for a manuscript number. We also captured more detailed inventory information. That way we could create stronger finding aids, attach accession information to the finding aid as well, because previously we had that specific unique box number and a notes field in our database. The notes field sometimes just said a brief description of what the information was inside the collection, or sometimes it was file or even item level inventory. So there was not a lot of consistency. So for the first move, we called it our consolidation. This occurred in May of 2019, and I had to create a lot of different floor plans for the movers in this preparation. We did have extra shelving moved and set up into our 2 locations that we were going to use. All of our department items, our furniture, our office stuff, our book stacks, those were all moved over to the new building at the UHV library. We were rearranging collections based on collection number. So we put everything in order based on MSS number. The regional historical resource depository information for those 7 counties were stored upstairs on our 3rd floor in 1 room. And I had already gone through and created record groups and ordered things chronologically. That way we could more easily find stuff within our RHRD material. Any of our unprocessed stuff, because We have about a 15-year backlog of our unprocessed materials that went to the front of our department where our like office furniture for one of our assistants had been set up previously. And then the rest of our archives for both institutions and manuscript collections were put on the shelving where book stacks previously lived, as well as the original HC location for all of our History Center shelving. This drawing is the mock-up of the new location. However, not all of this is storage. I wish. This is the Northwest campus of UHV. So our library storage is just on one side, library and archives. But some hiccups that we ran across getting to our offsite storage. We were originally going to be in the Victoria College Library building, just storing for about 3 months. And it ended up being almost a year because construction was delayed 8 months. We did continue serving our patrons and researchers by bringing materials from the VC library building to the new building. However, we use our own vehicles for this transport. We're hoping to get a van this year. We're very excited. But as anyone I'm sure can imagine, our materials were all up on the second and third floor. Our new department was up on the third floor of the new building. You have to use elevators and bring carts down to the parking lots, and just going through that transport back and forth took time. So I was out of the office quite a bit. It's just myself and a research assistant in our department. Sometimes we have a student assistant if we're lucky for special projects. So in order to keep my research assistant able to help patrons constantly and keep the department open instead of closing, hey, I'll be back in an hour, I have to run to storage. I'm typically the one running to get materials. And then we came to COVID and we were shut down starting on March 30th. Now, we were luckier than most. We were only shut down for 6 weeks, and then staff was able to return to offices, but we did not continue seeing patrons face-to-face for quite some time. Also during COVID, right after we had been shut down a couple weeks, we got the date of opening storage. So we had our move scheduled. We had to go through, my library director and I had to go through clearance from the university to become essential personnel to come to campus and oversee this 2 to 3 day process of the move. The movers luckily did all the building of the shelves, moving the materials, unloading materials. However, the planning process getting here was extensive. Floor plans were constantly redone. I would just show the other staff members in the library that had no clue what all the different collections I actually held in the Regional History Center were, and ask them, does this make sense to you? Because these movers are coming in with no idea about the collections. They are known for moving libraries. They know how to move the materials safely. So after many different attempts of the floor plans, I think that was a smart decision because getting that outside feedback and having my colleagues ask questions for me to then consider cut out a lot of the questions and confusion that the movers had during our actual moving day. However, problems with the plans, these are just an example of inside our stacks over at storage. We do hold a lot of our local clubs and organizations, records and archives and such. And some of those organizations are still meeting and still continue adding to their collection. I did not plan to add growth space on the floor plans for the movers. So now we are going to have a very lengthy shift project going on because I have a colleague with some archives experience starting to process materials for me since I still have too many other projects to do. And she has come across collections we already have, and it's just going to be an addition, but there's no room on the shelf next to the boxes where they currently live. So that's going to be a very fun process moving 200 collections because those clubs and local organizations are spread throughout the entire MSS numbering system. The organization of storage is vastly different from the last building. Obviously, we're in a different setup and different system. So training new staff and previous staff on the new layout for retrieval was a bit of a problem. For older staff that was there, they just did not understand the new system because it was so different from the previous system for the last 30 years. Training new staff has been a lot easier. However, coming in as a new staff member and seeing all of these different types of collections and where they live is a little overwhelming for them at first. However, we have increased our access, which was the purpose. We wanted to be able to increase access as we moved over to storage. We do have more detailed finding aids now, and that helps for our researchers to see what we have in our holdings before they come or before they make a consultation with us about their research needs. We did have a new CMS that went live in December. So we have seen a lot of usage from like the different reports we can run. So it's exciting that the patrons are using the new system, even though not everything is in the new database. So we still have both currently running on our website. Since the move occurred during COVID shutdown, we weren't seeing patrons in person. So we increased our scanning projects and how we helped patrons virtually, and just kind of a different way of giving service than we had previously done before in the department. UHV library did return fully open with no appointments required in August of 2021. So we kind of got back to normal at that point. And honestly, it's just so much easier for us staff members to now pull materials instead of going on scavenger hunts, because this is the box number we had and that room's no longer used. So where did it get moved to? Which happened quite a bit in my first year there. And these are just some of our quick access statistics. The blue bar on the chart was from my first year in the department. And then the top section is for our virtual patrons. Bottom section is total patrons. Our yellow bar is from this past fiscal year, and we have surpassed both total and virtual patrons from my first year here. So we were excited about that. But of course, we always have future projects to keep in mind, and that will consist of digitization. We have a lot of club scrapbooks and organizations scrapbooks in our collection, and they are bulky. They're in oversized boxes. We just want to be able to scan them and have them online, which we use Content DM for our digital collections. That way our patrons can see them all the time. We don't have to go over and pull those larger oversized boxes. And especially since you can only fit maybe 2 in an oversized box. If they want to see all their scrapbooks, which I've had requests for, that's about 10 to 15 boxes to pull at one time, and transport in your personal vehicle. Make sure that nothing gets damaged in that time period. And then we also have on the picture on the right is the map collection, and any of the ones that are rolled, they're well over 60 inches wide. We don't have a scanner big enough for that. We're going to be looking into sending them off to get digitized somewhere else, because that's also a lot of risk to travel with them in your vehicle when it gets to be a certain oversized size of a map, and especially if you're doing it by yourself. There's my contact information, and then we will be passing it over to our other presenter, Matthew, online.
Can you transfer the share permission?
On.
Okay.
Maybe in more.
There we go. Okay, hold on. There we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Pink, and I am the head of the University of Houston Clear Lake Archives and Special Collections in the Alfred R. Newman Library, right next to Johnson Space Center. So I can see him from my office window. And the title of my presentation is Making Space for Access, Turning the Archive's Founding Period Corner to Formal Collection Management. So the UHCL Archives and Special Collections, our mission, we were founded in 1989 to collect, preserve, and make accessible, publicly accessible original historical archival materials for use by our constituents for research and preservation of community history. And we're the primary repository for the University of Houston Clear Lake. The UHCL Archives has 3 collecting areas, and we also have another collection that we'll get to in a minute. Our university archives, our human spaceflight collection, which is the history of Johnson Space Center and the personal papers of the former personnel and engineers and scientists from there. Our Clear Lake area collection, which are collections from our communities that surround the campus. And then our Johnson Space Center history collection, which we have on renewable loan from NASA and the National Archives, making us one of the only non-federal institutions in the country to manage federal records. And then all these materials are open for research to students, faculty, alumni, the staff on campus, and the general public. Our total collections of our owned materials are over 2,800 linear feet, and then the NASA-owned collection is over 3,000 linear feet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into this, and that's key to this. So you can see some of my previous work. I have in the past founded Airstream Incorporated, the travel trailers corporate archives, in 6 months. And then I previously worked for the State Archives of North Carolina as their military collection archivist, where I came in before the centennial for World War I to manage over 110-year old collection and solve issues with collections that hadn't been described to modern standards, last being formally described in the 1960s. So I am used to coming into places with bad management, bad paperwork, no description, hard to find anything. It's not my preference, but it's what I get put into. And I was hired for this job specifically to bring the UHC archives up to date to more professional standards. So I'm going to run you through a quick history of the archives because you're going to need this for background. Then we're going to go into major issues caused by the previous years of our collection management. And then talk about keys to turning this around, key things you need to do, and then how we executed it and some closing thoughts. There's a lot of text on the screen. I'm going to skim through it. Feel free to read along. But this is really important to understand this. We're less than 33 years old. Going into our 34th year now. And so we're relatively young archives. We were founded in 1989, like I said, for about 5 years. We had a part-time, one-day-a-week university archivist who was from a local public library with no experience in a university setting. Then a university archivist worked 8 hours per month. An assistant worked 20 hours per week here. And then in August 2001, we hired our first full-time university archivist. That's when we got our JSC history collection from NASA. It was our first custom-built archive storage room and shelving paid for NASA. And you can see the JSC history collection in the photo coming into us. And then we began our human spaceflight collection about a year or two after that collection came into us because we had NASA stuff. And we were attracting former JSC personnel because of that. And then in around 2008, 2010, we started our Clear Lake area collection, but didn't formally start it as a collecting area until 2012. We had a new university archivist in 2012 that was renamed Associate Director, which is the current title. And we went from part-time positions and one full-time position to 2 full-time positions. From June of 2019 to February 2022, there was no associate director for the archives. We had 1 full-time archives assistant doing reference to keep the building open, 5 to 6 temporary part-time staff that were hired with little training, little supervision, and many with little experience in archives settings. We had a new library executive director at the time and 3 interim archives directors overseeing the overall operation of the archives from different parts of the library. I started in March 2022. After a 2.5-year gap in leadership, I was supposed to be hired in March of 2020 when the pandemic hit. And then recently, January and through March of 2023, our executive director and operations director retired or left their positions. And we have our top two leadership are interims, and they have no experience with archive supervision. So I want to say right now, I'm not criticizing my predecessors, and that might seem like it. I tend to focus on the work. I tend to focus on, for access, what are you doing to save yourself time so that you can spend more time promoting your collections, making the collections accessible, describing the collections better so they're discoverable, helping people, helping researchers. Everything that you do that's management related that should be easy, simple, or have been done before is taking away from your time to help with access. So I see this work as getting things stabilized when you come in to manage a collection, not necessarily changing everything, but if it needs to be because it's problems and you hear feedback from users and volunteers and interns and staff about problems, you need to fix it. So this is how it was done. We had no formal accession acquisition program or system. Accessions were not made until collections were processed. So sometimes deeds of gifts were not signed until then. About 1 in 4 collections have no donation or transfer paperwork. Since I've been here, that's what we found. Our donation records are incomplete. We're missing early years, and we have almost no donation records pre-2001. Single collection numbering system for 3 collecting areas. And it's causing problems because our human spaceflight materials, which are NASA connected, are getting mixed up with our federally owned JSC history collections. So we have 4 different collecting abbreviation schemes that were used over the years because there was nothing formally documented or planned. And here you can see an example. They wrote HSF for human spaceflight, and then the collection number, which is the accession number. But HSF didn't mean anything. They just put it there. Until 2008, many of our collections folders don't have collection name or collection number written on them. So if you pull it from the box and you don't know where it's from or mark it, you are lost. Other than half of one compact shelving system, all of our shelving is old narrow library shelving with no top covers, limits how much we can fit on shelf spaces by box types. So we have over 700 linear feet of open space now, but only 350 we can actually use. No extent list for our total holdings or by collecting area. We can't apply for grants. We couldn't do collections promotions saying we have this much footage of this collection, and donor relations was tough. We couldn't work with our University Alumni Association to say, hey, we have this much of this stuff. And then we had no accurate linear or cubic footage estimates. Something that I wanted to point out, because this is small things that people don't think about, but it's key when you're applying for grants. For 23 years over that, our archivists were miscalculating box sizes. So for my whole career, a Hollinger document case box standard letter size is 0.4 linear feet. That was the rule. But we listed it as 0.5 linear feet. And the way they got to that is because a full Hollinger box letter size is 5 inches deep. They use 5 inches for box depth as 0.5 linear feet. But if you divide 5 inches by 12 inches, you get 41.66% of a linear foot, which is 0.417 rounded up. And that's from Benecke Rare Book and Manuscript Libraries linear footage calculator. So we had completely wrong linear extent listings in our finding aids. We had no content management system. Prior to 2014, we used Quadristar and Archivist Toolkit, and then we used WordPress XML files for finding aids. We had no digital preservation repository system. We have limited digital collections online, but a lot of more digital content. We would post selected items and finding aid PDFs in our Newman Library's digital institutional repository DSpace, but no metadata. And DSpace is used for our archival items, but because people can't find the items because of poor metadata. There's no shelving formal numbering system, location system. There's no shelf labels and that are updated. Unprocessed collections were intermixed with processed collections. Archives had, we had very small posted usage rules on a sign on a wall that no one knew was there or could read because they were ultra small. And then the rules weren't on the table as in most archives or in a handout that you could give them at registration. And we had no usage or reference stats consistently recorded for over 4 years. Our archives forums were mostly based on ARMA's 2002 book sample forums, which haven't been updated. Our forums hadn't been updated since 2014 and had no UHCL logos, which is not professional standards from where I've been in the past. We had no archival processing manual for interns and volunteers, and we had a lot of interns and volunteers. It was a 1-page bulleted list on processing up to 2019, and then a 2.5-page list added after that. We had a 21-page general procedures manual created in 2019, but it mixed our collection policies, scanning procedures. It's a mess. Stacks had not been cleaned in 7 years at least. Environmental monitoring practices were not justified. We were doing 2 hand checks a day at recording, but no basis or structure for what we viewed as acceptable measurements. So we're just taking temperatures and humidity levels. We had our archival books, historical publications, manuals, booklets had been cataloged with sticky labels by our general library cataloging staff. They'd come up to the archives, enter our stacks. Our doors were often left open, pulled carts with materials out to catalog and return. They'd catalog anything on the carts, including archival materials that weren't meant to be. And all of our UHCL historical publications that are archival are cataloged this way. General books that the library thought were old and historic, they give to the archives. We don't collect historic or rare books, but they give them to us. There's no policy, no colored labels to differentiate those books from our materials. And then older and more historical books than the ones we're given are still left on our library shelves. And these books are causing acidic and environmental issues in our storage, and it's taking up over 200 linear feet. And our map case filing system is a mess, and the collections in there are not listed consistently. So here you can see our entrance at the top left, our JSC history collection at bottom left, and over at right is what one of our storage rooms shelving looked like, the regular library shelving, where collections were just stored all over. They didn't use the top shelves for anything other than empty boxes. They didn't use the bottom shelves largely because that's what librarians do with bookshelves in general book stacks. So we were wasting a lot of space. They used a lot of Post-it notes, which looked bad when we toured donors. Donors would ask about it. We had limited collections access and discoverability. It was better from 2008 to 2014. Still to this day, UHCL faculty, staff, and students don't know that the university has an archives or what we collect. The university's own records, we almost never get anyone coming up here and using them, even administration. The staff don't know we have a records retention schedule. There's no digital records preservation program. We have no dedicated network storage apart from Office 365 and a basic network drive. The public doesn't know we have Clear Lake area collections that they can come in and use. And then we have been called the NASA archives forever because we have JSC history collection instead of the university archives, which is what we are founded for. And I think this is the last. Collection policy definitions, we didn't exist. It was less than 3 pages. It allowed for wide variety of materials to be collected that didn't meet our current policy formats, condition, content standards. Clear Lake area communities that we collected were not defined, and because we didn't list them online or in our collection policy, other archives in our region have been collecting our area for the past 5 years. So we've lost collections. Our interns and volunteers and former part-time staff have told me that they felt there was no support for their work. There were no manuals, no set processes, no answers for questions without asking the archives director constantly. The interns didn't gain much training. In fact, one of them is now my archivist. And our volunteers received little instruction and would start pulling their own collections from unlocked storage rooms, which caused issues. So here's an example of our old collection policy. At left, that is our 2016 collection policy. That is it. And at right is the first page of our new 9-page collection policy. Collection donation records, they're a mess. They're incomplete. Like I said, there's no way to search them other than by hand. Our past records for archives, they're scattered. The management records are not saved consistently. A lot of them are saved in OneNote files. We have no storage controls, no tracking system over the past 12 years. Our finding aid template was not updated since at least 2001, and it's not meeting professional standards. There's no abstracts, there's no subject terms, no donor information almost. A lot of the processors our names aren't there. Limited biohistorical notes. Formats are not listed in finding aids. And then we have things like 10 separate collections for one UHCL president. And it's developed into a bad relationship with our facilities management because we keep, every time there'd be a 2% humidity fluctuation in a storage area, they'd call them and say, hey, we need help with this. And there's nothing that they can do because of our current setup. So here's our old finding aid example at left. You can see the template, and then at right is a filled out one, and it's almost the same as the template. There's almost nothing added. And then our index terms is in the center. These are not Library of Congress subject headings. People just created terms. So what do you need to get archives like this? The operation stabilized and collections accessible. Get the management settled, get the form settled, get the policy settled, get the outreach materials settled so that you can focus on doing actual archival work. You need to update or create your new collection policy. We did ours within a month. You need to create blank forms for operation, deed of gift, deposit receipts, acquisition, accession forms, record management transfer forms, deaccession form. We had no deaccession policy or forms. Finding a template, we have to update. New processing plan, transfer to and from forms. We didn't have those. Monthly reports. We weren't doing monthly reports for years, and we had no stats tracking spreadsheet. We've got that now. Volunteer intern application form and hours tracking sheet. We had a form, but it was old and we had no hours tracking. Create new informal reference policies until formal ones can be instituted. You need to update your website or other online solutions so that you can improve information for researchers and donors and stuff you can send them in links in emails. You need better signage in your archives and around the host institution. We had almost no direction signage, and we're working to improve that. Flyers, brochures, short tour promotional videos, you need to get those out there. If no one knows you exist or what you have, they're not going to come use it, and you're not going to get support from your administration. Unprocessed collections, you need to survey them. You need to review processed collections, see condition, preservation. You need to upgrade your existing acquisitions, accessioning, inventorying processes and forms, and stop the old practices. And then you need software. You need a photo editor, an audio editor, and a media editor. And these are free ones that I've used for years: IrfanView, Audacity, and VLC Media Player. You need archive supply list. You need to generate a supplies inventory spreadsheet with the supplier name, the product catalog number, the web page link, and the justification, and how it's going to for the expenditures and how it's going to be used. If you don't have that, then supervisors will want justification for, like when I asked for $5,100 in supplies last year, or else they're not going to give it to you. And then your first supply list that you do when you get in a situation, you can repurpose this. You have all the things. You don't have to research this on supply vendor site. You just have to check the prices. So what did we do in our first year? How did we implement this, and how can you implement this? We implemented our new collection policy. We called it a working policy before we could get formal approval. We started working to promote our new collection policy on campus and externally. We met and talked with ongoing donors to clarify expectations that they had been told previously to me starting. We began rejecting collections that would have formerly been accepted that were junk, and it stopped us wasting our space, storage space. We began creating new blank forms and templates. We reviewed acquisition accessioning practices before making decisions on unprocessed materials. We had 10 full carts of miscellaneous materials because they just stored stuff on carts. They had no approach to how to handle it. And it was filling up our storage rooms. Donors were commenting on it. And so we handled that to make it look better for tours. We reviewed the past 3 years of donation paperwork and entered acquisitions and created collection record folders because they hadn't been entered. They were just on someone's desk. We added security signs to storage rooms and a new door sign because we didn't have restriction signs for our storage room doors. We created a new brochure for outreach, new flyer for faculty and students. We met with potential donors and endowment opportunities that had been stalled before I'd started to ensure them that we're committed. We met with library administrators to educate them on needs, next steps, paperwork requirements, legal announcements, etc. I negotiated $31,000 in donation endowments. And then we had an open house for our library and a staff association tours. We got to 100 people in our space. We reinitiated our partnership with our local NASA retirees group, who revamped their volunteer program. They've volunteered with us a lot, and they endow a paid space history collections internship program. We were getting poor quality candidates. We revamped the program for the internship to get better, and we're getting more funding from them as a result. We created our first LibGuides page and developed the LibGuides page to serve as the active website, a lot like what Texas A&M University of Commerce does, because we can't actively edit our current web page. And then we work to get our presence through Google search results. updated, like this from the NASA Alumni League, our partner. Their website gets better search results. So I went through them. We did public programs, their newsletters, put information. When we got new interns, they shared that news. This is our new LibGuides page with links to everything. We got a donation page. We've got a blog site. We've got UHCL archives in the news. So we put links in here to use for our marketing department. We send them this when we get stuff out there so they know what's going on. In 3.5 weeks, we updated our scope and content notes for our finding aids, bio notes, and generated abstracts to get our DSpace version finding aids discoverable. It resulted in better discovery, and Google research researchers found the stuff in Google. Our international researchers for NASA stuff were able to find the collections better. We launched a new blog, created a 3.5-minute tour video I did for SSA last year, but we used it for donors in mind. So we use it as an introductory video for researchers, donors, and classes before they come here. Here's an example of the old finding aid at the left and the new finding aid at the right. You can see the difference in the quality of the description, which means more keywords in Google to find the stuff. We implemented a 2-month deaccessioning effort, cleared 50 linear feet out. We have another 31 planned following paperwork. We rebuilt our donation processing reference staffs that we're using for grant applications. We surveyed our process and unprocessed collections, used colored dots, you can see at right, to represent visually which collecting areas were unprocessed, so we can just walk the stacks and know. We estimated our linear footage, rebox collections, and listed collecting category area by collections, and then create a spreadsheet so we can locate them by donors and calculate our linear footage. This is our first deaccession at Wright, and my staff member, Robert Nanez, as we're taking out our first weeding project trash. This is our unprocessed collection spreadsheet from our quick survey. So we just do simple linear footage, collection area, title, process, unprocessed, notes, and then the shelving location. And then we shifted one of our storage rooms. We weeded out collection materials. We alphabetized our unprocessed collections by donor named. We gained 400 linear feet of space. And it allows us to plan for the next 2 years. We're redoing our collection numbering system since we're updating our finding aids and changing our collection numbers. And then we're going to change our box labels because it's quick and it's easy to do. At left is what our current label looks like. At right is what our new one looks like. It's much more beautiful. It has branding. It's easier to see for people. Here's our updated storage. Unprocessed collections are combined. They're not wasted in shelves. The shelf space is clear. We can use it. And then we relaunched our outreach to 2 UHCL academic programs. We had 7 classes, 110 students come in after none in the previous 3.5 years. We're going to be involved in more art history and museum studies program classes in the next year. And we hired our first full-time archivist since 2019. And we did all this for the first 7 months of me being here with 2 staff members and me with a partially torn ligament in my foot in a walking boot. So what final thoughts, because I'm a couple minutes over, you need to plan, execute your plan, get it done, but you have to have multiple options selected in case your first one or the best option fails for some reason. You need to keep things moving forward. You need to be willing to get yourself out there and talk with people. You need to jump into various institutional and community programs as soon as possible. Get your name out, get your name and your institution's name out. Reach out to people you think will benefit from your collections, but don't know it. They will help you promote your collections. Get in with your administration and prove yourself quickly as competent professional. You need early wins. Important collections brought in, important collections processed, news stories, something to show progress. When you get frustrated, channel that into new ideas for work. Don't get bogged down. You don't have time. And don't get bogged down in long projects if you can help it. Do a lot of smaller projects to improve discovery, access, and can assist you. You may not get the ideal, but the steps will get you a firm foundation and can make accessing your collections and the management information faster for you and your constituency. And that's my contact information. And that is all, folks. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. And we're happy to take questions. I see one in the back already.
this may have to be opened up to the floor. I come from a state archives in which I have 5 vaults that I have to inventory. No, well, they tried to do an official inventory, but it got bogged down with different staff members deciding their own way of doing inventory. How do you get staff buy-in to do things the anal and correct way to do it?
Okay. Okay, if you want to go ahead.
Okay, just to repeat the question. So she's working at a state archives, has 5 vaults worth of material to inventory, multiple staff members, but is asking how to get staff member buy-in on one cohesive way, hopefully the correct way of inventorying a collection that size. I had to do my inventorying solo, so I'm not going to answer this.
So I worked at the State Archives in North Carolina in Special Collections Unit, not government records, but I also worked for the Montana Historical Society. And I've been through this, but I've not been the one in charge. My bosses just told me to do it. They had a plan, they met with people, they came up with a system. And if you're not doing it, then you're not doing the survey. Like that's the deal. You know, like for me, I have 3 staff members. I instituted guidelines. I wrote up a one thing. And if they're not doing it, then I explain what you're doing is here's what we're going to be missing. You always want to as consequences, right? I tell my staff, if you're not doing this, this is the result. This is the possibility of the result. I don't let them figure it out or try to be right. I say, here are the things that will happen because I have been in the situations where this is what will happen. And then I give them examples. And if they don't buy in, then I don't have them involved. Now, if they get angry, you're a state employee. I was a state employee. You're paid by the state. You're supposed to be benefiting the state. At some point, this is a professional endeavor. And if they're not willing to do it within the parameters as supervisor and boss, you know, I would never have flown if I told my previous state archivist I wasn't going to do it. Like that just, I would have been left off of committees. I would have been left off grant application processes. That's what happens. It's not a great idea, but that's the reality of working at the state archives.
Hand over.
I have a response. I've had good luck putting creating access databases that everybody can work in. And if you have SharePoint, it could be a shared document that people can go in. I put all of our books in there to do a shelf read, and I have a couple of people able to go on the shelf and check off the books on there and note ID numbers. We did a box inventory collecting barcodes on the boxes, and it was also an access database. So the database could walk them through the process on the information that they want to gather.
Well, and just to clarify, it's not so much of I don't have everything in place. We have an access database that clearly was, it's more of a unwillingness to participate. You say you cut them out of the process. That leaves me and 2 other people out of the 20 crew. So it's like, it's not very helpful for the 3 people who are always given the projects to do things. Where everybody else is gonna get to do whatever the heck they want to do. And I'm not their boss. I don't get to pull them from the grants, pull them from the fun stuff. I'm just the intake registrar, archivist, however you want to call them, who has to started last August and was told, hey, please inventory our 5 vaults. And, cool.
Yeah. If you have that, honestly, get whoever is their boss or your boss's boss and just to sit down and talk with them and explain the situation. If they don't do it, then you're not going to get it. I mean, that's the bottom line. If your bosses aren't, there's no solve for this. That, you know, I had one employee who everything I was trying to change, they would go behind my back and tell my predecessor at lunch that they had every week together. And then I get random angry emails from me saying, you're updating this. I'm like, there are no collection numbers. The folders have no titles. There are no folder titles on these folders. And I have researchers for a World War I centennial that I'm trying to get stuff accessible for, telling me they can't find things they're looking for. So what do you want me to do? You know, at some point there have to be consequences, whether it's researchers getting angry or someone has to show displeasure that has influence. And it has to be shared in a group setting or me. If it's left sitting like individual choice, then yeah, they're not going to do it.
Do we have any more? Okay, I'll answer that one back there. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I wanted to ask Matthew if you could just go back. I really appreciate everything you went through. It's so helpful and I'm trying to get everything. You guys probably aren't aware that you're about the size of a cell phone screen, so I'm taking photos of your slides and I wanted to see if Matthew, I might email you or if you could just pop up the first slide of the must-have. I'm taking photos so I can like enlarge them later to get it. And the slide.
Just email me. It's very easy. It's peek. It's like peekaboo. It's PEEK at uhcl.edu. You can go to UHCL's website. You'll find our archives email. Just email me. Say, hey, I was at the session. I'd like your PowerPoint. That's not a problem.
That was powerful. From there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And real quick, just to see question, chat question online from Anna. Do you change the types of information you all captured or changed what to record in what fields? If so, what influenced that decision? Based on what was written, I'm guessing that was related to my presentation earlier. Basically, whenever we used our Access database, essentially the types of information mostly stayed the same. The one thing we kind of added was the extent field later, because we figured out it might be a good idea to have an idea of how the quantity of the items that we have, because just saying one line equals one box, that box might be a standard record center carton, that box might be a gigantic oversized thing, and those are very different in terms of space requirements. So no, that's one thing we changed, or we started doing after we had kind of really dove into the process. But in terms of what was recorded in the fields, that we kept relatively similar once we established that plan ahead of time with what information we're going to record. That stayed pretty similar throughout the whole thing. Is there any other questions from the audience? We got a few people. That's good. I don't know who wants to go first here.
Said you had people that were versed in library. Do you think that did you go all the way Iron Mountain or regular movers or somewhere in between?
So they, sorry, microphone. So they are considered a library moving company. The company's name was LDS. I would have to look it up online what that stood for. I know for a fact that they do all over Texas because they communicated that with us, like, oh, we're going to be in Houston on this week and we're going to be up in Dallas on this week, and we're 2 hours from Austin, Houston, San Antonio. So okay, and they may even go up. So all of our archives materials were already in boxes. Obviously, we didn't have loose items. There were a few like unique situations. We have the founder of our town's sword in a glass case made by one of his descendants. Our main project manager of the move, his name was Jonathan. He was fantastic. He was so excited to carry the sword and transport it in his truck. And he also had our interlibrary loans goose, like just like a yard goose. So he came downstairs carrying the sword and a goose. But other than that, they load up book trucks, they cover the book trucks, wrap the materials, load them into the moving truck. And then they also did the same with carts upon carts. They have huge bins that they use for the archive boxes.
I guess it's a question for you, though, with regards to like moving how do you get buy-in from like either the library administrator or the administrator? Because there's some experience that I would think maybe like they don't have to invest.
So moving materials, as far as like you have another option for storage and you, okay. So that was all kind of set in place before I got hired. Our current situation was in a much older building that had roof problems and AC unit problems, and they are eventually in the next 5 years going to be tearing that building down. We needed another storage option. The new library did not have the square footage to move the collection or even the entire library book collection. So they did all that with like going to administration for the university saying, this is what we need. They came up with the plan to put it in with one of the new buildings. So that's why we share the Northwest Campus building. And we're just completely separate. It's basically just an open warehouse in there. As far as funding the move, we were told that a specific account out of the president's office was going to fund the move. Then it was not. So we had to use a carry forward account that we luckily did have money in. So buy-in, that was all like my director's job. I didn't have to do that. She just said, I need you to get these ready to move in a year.
And well, real quick, I'll say that, so part of my I didn't mention this in the presentation, is we are renovating the upper level of our library in the next 2 years. We just renovated our lower level when I started, and that includes our archives. So we're gonna have to move all our collections, including federal records, to offsite storage somewhere and pay for it for a period of time. So part of the collection management and the listings and the control is to plan better for this. If I can't tell them how much linear footage I have, we can't plan for the storage location. If we, if I say the shelves we have, we can't just move the shelves out, use those as temporary storage. We need to have another solution. Then we're going to be stuck. So having the control, if you can, before this happens, before the move happens, you've got to do something. So even if it's not perfect, get as much as you can before the storage shift. Otherwise, you're going to be driving 15 minutes, maybe an hour to go to a facility, but based on where your institution can find to rent, and how are you going to find stuff? That's the reality.
Sorry.
That discovered collections that have, what did you do for those, reaching back out to the donors or?
Guess I can start. So the question was about when we found collections that didn't have a formal deed of gift, what did we do with those collections? And how did we approach that? For us at our institution, we haven't quite made it that far yet, to be honest with you. As best as we can, if we have a good idea of who donated the records, we'll try to reach out. The problem is, in our case, there are a lot of those we don't have necessarily a deed of gift. We also don't have contact information or a source of where they came from in the first place. So it's kind of basically an orphan collection. Here it is. That's what is there. So unfortunately, for a lot of them, we might not have necessarily someone to reach out to in that process. So we're kind of still going through that process right now, and hopefully we'll be able to do that with some of them. But for us, it's going to be a little bit of a hit or miss situation, I think.
But it's kind of like at the end of my
So the questions about our reference statistics, which was like our access statistics on my slide. So we also use SpringShare products in our library, and I created a form, and my assistant and I just fill out the form every reference we get, and that actually tracks because of what fields I put in. Is this an in-person reference, a email reference, a phone call reference? If they're part of the institutions on campus, if they're a patron from the community, and then we kind of go into more detail. If we pull boxes, if we pull a folder, photos, we track what all we're pulling for them as well. So I just used a form in LibForms or within LibWizard. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think we've reached the end of our time for our session. Thank you all for attending in person. Those of you online, we really appreciate it. Thank you.